Additionally, what you also see over the course of a normal night's sleep is a slow decline in body temperature. So, body temperature declines over several hours of sleep, reaches its lowest point, and then starts to go up as the person gets closer to waking and then continues to rise after the person has entered the waking state. This fall in body temperature also equates to a fall in metabolic rate during sleep. So, this is really a period of metabolic rest during sleep. And this is highly protective in many ways, since even normal metabolism generates a whole host of reactive oxygen species. And those reactive oxygen species can cause cellular and tissue injury, and it can accelerate cell aging. So, what this means is normal sleep patterns with this metabolic rest, with this period of a fall in metabolism reflected by the fall in body temperature, it really helps to protect cells, protect the integrity of tissues, and regulate the rate of cell aging over the person's lifetime. So, sleep is one of the many behaviors and physiological mechanisms of the body that occur according to what we call our circadian or 24-hour internal clock. And the generator of this circadian clock is a part of the brain that we call the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. Now, this SCN has spontaneous rhythmic neuronal activity around a 24-hour cycle, and it uses light cues from the environment to synchronize its spontaneous activity so that you can synchronize your biological day versus night to your environmental day versus night. Now, the SCN is located at the center of the brain, and it's located just above a structure called the optic chiasm, which is why it's called a suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the optic chiasm, if you looked at the bottom of the brain, the optic chiasm is where the two optic nerves that come from each orbit, each eye, the two optic nerves cross at the optic chiasm before then moving on to project to the visual cortex at the back of the brain, in the occipital lobe. Now, some of the axons coming from the eyes, from the retina, that travel through the optic nerve actually project directly to the SCN. Okay, so most of the axons project to the visual cortex, but a few of them, some of them project directly to the SCN. And those projections are providing the SCN with the light cues it needs to synchronize its activity with light from the environment. And in turn, the SCN uses those light cues to synchronize its activity and control and regulate a wide variety of body functions, including hormonal release, digestive function, blood pressure, body temperature, and many others, including, of course, sleep and waking. So, when we look at our sleep patterns and we examine the factors that determine how awake we are at any given time versus how sleepy we are at any given time, we see that this is determined by two main factors: our circadian clock, or our circadian time, and how long we've been awake, or in other words, our sleep debt, right, or sleep deficit. So in these graphs, starting up here with graph A, we see two lines drawn here, the one on the bottom and the one on the top. And the one on the bottom represents our level of alertness, while the one on the top represents our sleep deficit. Okay? So alertness, how alert or awake we are, how alert we feel. And our sleep deficit is really how long it's been, how many hours it's been since the last time we slept. So what you notice is that our level of alertness, we see in A here, our level of alertness rises and falls according to our circadian clock. Okay? We're at our most alert during the daytime hours and our least alert during the nighttime hours. And the top line, our sleep deficit, is lowest, obviously, upon waking from sleep. And then over the day, it gradually increases the longer we've been awake. In graph A, we see that in the early part of the day upon waking, our sleep deficit is at its lowest and our alertness is at its highest, or it's gradually increasing. So this early part of the day is when we should feel the least tired or sleepy and the most awake. Okay? And as the day progresses past midday, our alertness starts to decline while our sleep deficit starts to increase. And our sleep deficit makes us more and more tired, and our declining alertness makes sleep more and more possible. Okay. And then we finally enter our stage of sleep. Our alertness is very low. Our sleep deficit gradually decreases back to waking levels. Okay, and the whole cycle starts again. Now, if we look at graph B, we see the same factors graphed, but this subject has actually stayed awake for 40 hours before sleeping. Okay? So this person's been awake for almost 2 full days before they actually finally sleep. And we see in this B panel that the person's sleep deficit grows larger and larger over the course of this 40 hours of waking time. Okay? Much larger than it did when with panel A, where the person is sleeping at regular intervals. Okay. On the other hand, even though our sleep deficit is climbing greater and greater over the 40 hours of waking, the person's level of alertness continues to follow circadian time. Okay? This means that this subject B will feel the most tired or sleepy between the hours of 23 and 7. Okay? This is a period of time that they should actually be asleep. It's when their alertness is at their lowest and their sleep deficit is at their highest. But for some reason or another, subject B remains awake. Okay? And what you'll find is that between the hours of 7 and 12 the next day, that person will feel actually an increase in energy and less tired or sleepy because of this rise in alertness, despite the fact that their sleep deficit is continuing to rise, and despite the fact that they are actually have been awake longer than they did between 23 to 7. Okay, so they'll be much more alert between 7 and 12 than they were between 23 and 7, even though they've been awake for even longer. And then this subject B will find it the hardest to stay awake between the hours of 12 and 23 on day 2 of because his alertness is beginning to fall and his sleep deficit is reaching its peak. So the circadian pattern that we see in alertness illustrated in this slide is controlled by the SCN, and it's also a result in the rise and fall. It's also a result of the rise and fall in many hormones that stimulate and inhibit alertness in the brain. Two of these hormones, right, two of these many hormones, are of particular importance for this pattern. And one we call melatonin, and the other is cortisol.